Hey loves, it's Britt, and in this video, I'm talking about Venus in conjunct to Saturn or Venus quincunx Saturn in Synastry. So, this aspect is very interesting. All Venus Saturn aspects in Synastry are actually very common. Surprisingly, the hard aspects of Venus Saturn are quite common in long term marriages, relationships, and this aspect also common. All of them really are very, very common. So there's something about the energy of a Venus, love planet, and Saturn, the planet of karma, that actually work together. Now, it could also be, astrologers have said, because of Saturn's exaltation in Libra, that Venus Saturn is somehow a compatible theme. Now, the quincunx aspect or the inconjunct aspect is probably the most awkward aspect, or definitely the most awkward aspect that you can have in synastry. I do feel like it's not as obvious as the square or the opposition as far as the conflict. It's not as overt, but it's actually harder to resolve because it's going on more under the surface. That's the nature of the quincunx or the inconjunct, is that it's sort of like an eighth house or a sixth house energy. So it's not as overt. It's, causing more like underlying tension and like vague feelings of dissatisfaction. In this case, with Venus and Saturn being in conjunct in synastry, it's a vague feeling of actually fear. The Venus person can have a vague fear that the Saturn person is going to turn cold on them. And, the Saturn person isn't likely showing this behavior overtly, but the Venus person can sense that the Saturn person's energy, the way that they deal with conflicts, their karma, their life lessons, is so different than the way Venus loves and Venus's self-worth, even Venus's financial energy. They really can feel like if the Saturn person knew who they really were, that they would not love them. Now, that might not actually be a true thing. This is just a vague fear going on. So, the Venus person can be made to feel very insecure in this contact. And if it's combined with a lot of other hard aspects that show fears, like Pluto squares and, other Saturn squares or inconjuncts or oppositions, you have to look at the entirety of the synastry. If this is just like a minor thing, there's this quincunx and the rest of the synastry is mostly very favorable, this will just be a minor thing. Now, if this is thrown in with a bunch of other toxic mess of stuff and insecurity producing aspects, the Venus person might not want to entertain this relationship at all, because they get the sense that who they are as a feminine being, and men and women both can have feminine energy, and that feminine energy is shown by Venus, part of it, right? They get the sense that their heart and the way that they love is just going to be overlooked or pushed to the side, or suddenly the Saturn person is going to turn cold. They feel this vague fear of that happening. So they might just choose to not go into this at all. But if they do, I don't usually I don't think this is gonna be that deal breaker. It just, in rare cases, like Venus, when it's in hard aspect to Saturn, the Venus person usually feels very unheard or very unloved or very undesirable. Okay. And if they don't know that this is going on, they don't know astrology, they don't realize the Saturn person actually is probably not meaning to do that. That's when this relationship might not happen. So the Saturn person in this inconjunct gets vague feelings that the Venus person might be unfaithful or even superficial or extravagant. Like the Saturn person in Venus Saturn is usually kind of judging Venus in some way for their feminine energy. And they could actually, even with this inconjunct, they could feel quite jealous of Venus's beauty or Venus's finances or Venus's charm. That could be one of the things that they actually really like about Venus is how graceful they are or how liked they are, how popular they are, how beautiful they are, their body, their style. Like they actually like it a lot, but they feel threatened by it at the same time because it hits Saturn in kind of an insecure place where they get all stuck. They get all nervous. They get all, and it actually can be kind of cute with Venus Saturn overlays, how insecure. It's funny, they both kind of make each other insecure, but in a different way. The Saturn person feels like an old man or like they feel like they're just not ever going to be good enough for Venus, or they're likely coming from very different lifestyles that maybe the Saturn person feels Venus won't enjoy their type of life, or the serious work that Saturn has to do. They know that Venus doesn't really get it, or might actually like wreck it with their frivolity or their superficial behavior. It's like they can definitely judge Venus a lot for their lack of like seriousness or respect for the authority that they have and that they're trying to accomplish in this lifetime, as shown by Saturn. But it's very interesting because like I have actually had this in conjunction. I've had with my late husband. My Saturn was quincunx his Venus, Sun, and Jupiter because he had those in a stellium, and it's my Saturn is very different being in Pisces, but I definitely judged in him like his lack of introversion and his extroversion, his popularity. And my Moon and Mars are in Leo too, conjunct all that, so it wasn't probably as bad as this could sometimes be, but there is very much a judginess or even like a freezing up in my energy of like when he's being overly social or gregarious, like Leo, like just feeling like so uncomfortable with that kind of behavior with my Saturn looming over me in my 12th house, and like him not understanding my spiritual practices, my meditation, him doing nothing of that sort, right? In fact, doing sort of the opposite. So like that's just an example of a Leo Piscean in conjunct. Is like Leo is super extroverted and Pisces is like needing that connection to the divine through meditation or through a spiritual practice. And so that's sort of where some of the judgment went. But you could also like do this with any of the signs. You'll see how they don't really understand each other. They want to understand each other. It's not an overt conflict. It's not like this isn't something you're going to fight about. You're not going to be fighting about this Venus Saturn inconjunct. I fight way more with my boyfriend now who we have the Venus Saturn square. It's much more dominant in the relationship. But this one is almost like, because it's more unconscious, over time it could end up being even more damaging because you really don't see each other, and the Saturn person really is unaware of the ways that they undermine Venus and make them feel imperfect or not beautiful or insecure about their feminine energy and their heart. And then the Venus person just doesn't understand the way the Saturn person structures their life, and they get this sense that they can't add to that or they can't be a part of that. And so it's a very interesting aspect to have. It is pretty common. What I've seen commonly, like with my clients or with the many charts that I've studied in Synastry, is like it's common to have a Venus Saturn hard aspect on one side, and then have on the double whammy, like have you're having this aspect going both ways, and the other aspect will be like a trine or a sextile, and so you have this going both ways. That's very common. Or you have the conjunction and then the inconjunction or this aspect. And so it's like a major theme of the relationship. Or you could have this in conjunction and then it's conjunct in the composite chart and it shows you actually do resolve this. I had that with my late husband. So you have to look at everything. This is probably most of the time a more minor influence, but because of its sort of under the surface tension that you don't always catch right away, it can end up being damaging when you come to the realization of like how different you are. And it can also show really that like what the Venus does for pleasure is not really compatible with the lessons that Saturn is learning. And so that can end up being a block in enjoyment of life together. But it can also just show that you have separate lives. Like the Venus person is going to have separate pursuits of pleasure, and the Saturn person, you know, leads a different life as far as their life goals and their karma that they're working out. They just don't merge on this level. And if they can understand that this is going on, understand this in conjunction, understand the different qualities of these two signs, because the opposition is even much easier than the in conjunction in Synastry, because the in conjunction, the quincunx, is like we're aliens. We do not get each other, and that can actually make us feel even more insecure on this vague level. So it can end up being an energy drain on your relationship when you have this and you're unaware of it, because it's not as overt. You're probably happier than with the other hard aspects, but you don't realize the underlying tension and that vague fear, that vague uncertainty about this person. You don't realize where that's coming from until you realize you have this aspect, and then you meditate on it and see the dynamic going on. So it does tend to show like two people, like I said, that feel a duty to each other, feel a devotion to each other. Venus Saturn aspects can also show up where one person feels like an undying devotion. Like this could be a karmic contract from a past life that you have come to this life to commit to each other. As hard as it is, at times you are meant to stay committed and work this out. And Saturn in Synastry wants to work it out. There's this feeling of duty, there's this feeling of fatedness, and you know, the in conjunction, I feel like, is the most karmic aspect because of that 6th house 8th house connotation. And so you want to work this out, and it like you'll feel the desire to want to work it out, but without the understanding of astrology, it's very hard to see where this is coming from. And it's also very hard to blend those two signs unless you know, you might have other things going on that'll make this easier. But I think the first step is just bringing awareness to how you're different, those lifestyle differences too, and being okay with that, being okay that you have a separate source of like pleasurable things in life, and also, you know, being okay that you maybe are going in a different direction sometimes with this in conjunction, and trying your best to soothe the insecurities of each other rather than just unconsciously reacting and making each other more insecure about each other, about life, about the relationship. You need to make a conscious effort to build each other up. So yeah, I'd love to know your experience. I've shared a little bit of my experience on this video of this placement. What was it like for you? Let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your requests. Keep them coming in the comments, you guys. And bye. We'll talk soon.